Is this working? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so Carl and I are going to tag team. The way we said we were going to tag team this morning is we just tag team. Okay, cool. So thanks so much. This is my first Bitcoin conference, so I don't know what to expect. I've never been to one of these things. And thanks for Herman for inviting me. I really, really appreciate it. I come from a different angle. I am a hodler for, I think, since 2014 or 2015 when Simon Dingle introduced me to Bitcoin for the first time. It was here in Cape Town. I flew down, and he showed me Bitcoin. And I was like, this is the biggest load of shit I've ever seen. I mean, I thought this is just complete rubbish. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to skip over this video. I'm going to show you this. This is why. Because I was working in the payment space. And I had built a little thing called a payment pebble. Some of you may have interacted with it before, that little thing that plugs into a phone that converts the phone into a card acceptance machine. I'd worked in technology like that, very, very arcane technology to do card acceptance and payments. Now, that stuff was built here in South Africa. We were way before Yoko, and we were pretty much the same time Jack Dorsey announced Square. That was more or less the same time Visa actually invested in our company also here in South Africa. Square was going direct to consumer. We were going to work with the bank. So we launched through ABSA. ABSA called it the Payment Pebble. It went to Australia. It went to New Zealand. It went to Southeast Asia. And it was manufactured and built here in South Africa. Like 19 patents associated with it. So we came from a world where we were building this secure device plugged into a phone, and we could take a non-secure device, convert it into a card acceptance machine. We were doing key loading. We were doing PCI, SRED, you name it, PCI DSS, data centers, etc. And then someone sat down with me called Simon Dingle, and he said, let me tell you about Bitcoin. And I looked at him and I said, come on, man. What do you mean I can send value from one person to another person without an intermediary more securely than we've ever done in the history of humanity? Like, no, it's absolutely obvious. So I did my research. I went through my whole cycle. So I went in it, and I thought, oh, Bitcoin's pretty cool, but Ethereum's like really cool. Right? And then I was like, okay, wait, it's not that cool. And then I went into like the blockchain thing, like, oh, but blockchain technology, then I stopped very quickly there. Then I realized how much crap was actually going on in the industry. And I used to go to conferences, and I remember Carl and I speaking about this. I went to Standard Bank, and I sat down with them, and they had just established their blockchain team. And I made a bet with them, and I said, if you deploy anything that's like realistic and good and sound, and this architecture that you call the Bitcoin, or a blockchain, I'd pay you money for it. And I still haven't deployed anything that's anything meaningful. So I did my whole circle, and I came back to Bitcoin in the end. And I've been in it, and I've been in it in a way that's very different from a traditional hodler. You guys are very active. You're active on Twitter, and you get together like this, etc. What I've tried to do is very quietly, and I've told Herman this too, very quietly in the background, speak to very senior leaders in South Africa about Bitcoin. The change that you're going to have to see in Bitcoin, how's it? I just only saw you now, James. The change that we're going to have to see here is not going to happen by us wearing our orange ties and our orange shirts and screaming and on Twitter and making noise at conferences. Okay, this is good because this allows us to network, and from a technological perspective, this is sound. But what we need to do is bring technology leaders in our country, politicians over. We need to bring them over. We need to speak to Saab. And I'm going to speak to some of those things and what we're doing. Okay, so this is where I came from, and now I'm in the Bitcoin world, and I'm just as orange-pilled as you guys are here. I eat it, I sleep it, I drink it all the time. And my biggest worry about our industry right now is that the shit coins. I mean, I just see too much of it going on, right? XRPs and these people just keep popping up all the time. I think what's happening in the United States is amazing. Trump announced the crypto thing, right? We were waiting for the SBR, and now we got like the CBR. We didn't really get, or the SCR. We didn't really get the Bitcoin thing, and I think that's very worrying. And I think we've got to watch out for that in South Africa. So what's happening in the United States is great, but what we want to do is make sure that people know the difference between what Bitcoin is and what crypto is. Like for me, I think we should stop saying the word crypto. Right? It confuses everyone, really does. It confuses leaders, it confuses politicians because they can't see the difference between the two. And when Megatron or the Tron chain goes down like it did 4 or 5 hours ago, they read that stuff and they think, well, why can't that happen to Bitcoin? It really muddies the waters, and I think we need to differentiate ourselves from crypto. We are not crypto, we are Bitcoin. For me, that bubble that shows crypto like sitting in with fiat, a bubble within a bubble, that and then Bitcoin is separate, I think we need to keep echoing that all the time because it is very, very confusing, and we're picking this up. So let's go in. Very simple. I've been on an orange pilling exercise for probably 2.5 years. Carel's been with me, and just kudos to Carel, because he's one of the smartest guys I've met in this space. He really, really is. And with his credibility and his technological prowess, I've pulled him into meetings that I don't think he even expected to sit in. And we'll share some of those meetings today. So where we've gone and what we've done. So for me, this is where the orange pilling needs to happen. Let me just give you an update on this. Nothing to announce here today. There's lots of non-disclosure here, and there's lots of things that we can't really talk about, but I'm going to allude to it. So we've gone into ESCOM. And we've gone into ESCOM deeply. Board level, CEOs. Carel's been with me. We've gone in there. We've spoken to them about Bitcoin, but specifically about Bitcoin mining. Because we want them to leverage their curtailed energy. We know the value proposition it'll have for the renewables. And Carel's going to tell you a lot about that in a little bit when he gets up. We've spoken to politicians. And politicians, it's all about education. So Helen Zill here today, I think the first time she actually heard about Bitcoin intensely, etc., was at a business conference a few years ago in the Drakensberg when I did the Bitcoin presentation there. She sat down with me afterwards, and she really kind of grasped on it. But politicians kind of grasp on it in a different way. They're constantly looking for the political capital. Like, wait, so if I announce this or we do this, does this do this? They look at it very differently. You've got to understand the acumen when you speak about Bitcoin. The GNU government, Rob Hatzoff, a lot of you know Rob. I have a business with Rob. Carel's involved in that business too. And he's been very rabid about engaging the various political parties. And I'll show you a letter that we've sent them at the beginning of the year. And it lobbies for strategic Bitcoin reserve. So we've had phone calls, we've had meetings, and I know James and folks, you've had meetings with some of them. Jimmy Manyi is going to be here. That came from a Rob Hertzhoff engagement, and I sat down with Jimmy, and I really had to convince Jimmy about Bitcoin. But he got there. And I think James just kind of clinched that nail a little bit, and he's here today. He's going to speak about it. I think it's here today or tomorrow, I'm not sure, but he's orange-pilled now. And just by the way, I'm not part of MK. Everyone thought I was part of MK when I retweeted his tweet, and people were like, yeah, I'm not part of any particular political party. It's just we have to bring all these guys over, okay? Saab, big issue at South African Reserve Bank right now, the IFWG, that intergovernmental working group that published the policy paper that oversees the legislative framework that we operate within. Big issues there. We've got to fix stuff there, okay? That's the stuff that they're doing there is stale. It needs updating, and there's clauses in there that's stopping us from doing certain things. So one of the things that I'm working on right now, I can't disclose the details on it, but I believe if we can get the fourth point, if we can get Saab to come along, South Africa will announce its first Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed equity linked to a strategic Bitcoin reserve, just like a MicroStrategy. Okay, so we're very close. The write-up's been done, the homework's been done, we've submitted it to them, and we're very, very close to launching like the South African MicroStrategy. So you can kind of see where this is, for me, if we can get these folks along, broadly speaking, it really kind of greases the skids for all of us. It really makes Bitcoin a real thing. Now, a lot of Bitcoiners feel nervous about this stuff because they feel like, wait a minute, does this institutionalize us? Does this create like more monitoring over the protocol, etc.? If you want to see the vision around Bitcoin truly being what we all believe it can be, this is the constituency that we have to bring along. If we don't bring this constituency along, it's going to be very tough. Okay, people saving in it, it has to be integrated with the financial services fabric, and these are the constituents that are going to get us there. If we want to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve for South Africa, you can't do it excluding ESCOM. Because one of the value propositions is, yes, we need to buy Bitcoin to do it. Yes, we need to take some of our gold and liquidate it to do it. But a big aspect of that is how do we earn it, right? And that's bringing our energy ecosystem along. And that's ESCOM. So we've got to bring them along. And then we need the legislative frameworks around it. So before I go any further, I'm going to hand over to Carel. So you can do this. You can do the ESCOM pitch and just show what the ESCOM folks are doing. Okay?
Yeah. Cool.
Let's go.
All right. Hello. All right, so if South Africa were to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve, there's a few ways in which it can do that, in which you can acquire Bitcoin. First, you can earn it, but that's not going to work very well. South Africa can't really sell cookies for Bitcoin. They can maybe create some taxation mechanism or something like that, but or they can seize it. We've seen that quite a bit, confiscate the Bitcoin from us in this room. through exchanges, of course, not if you hold your own keys, or they can buy it. But and that's probably the most obvious thing to do. But buying is not the most efficient mechanism to acquire Bitcoin. It is actually to mine it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Bitcoin mining and how a nation state or a national utility would go about in mining Bitcoin. Now, first, a few facts about electricity generation in South Africa. So Eskom generates about 45,000 megawatts with coal, so excluding all the other ways in which they are generating electricity. And the way that coal works is you burn it, you warm up water, which becomes steam. The steam goes through a turbine, and it looks like this, these huge things. And then the turbine turns a generator, and you get electricity out on the other side. Now, these are very, very large machines. I used to work on a power station called the Tabu Power Station in the Vaal, and we burn 1 ton of coal every second. So it's about a bucky load every second. 365 days, 24 hours a day, since the 1980s. And Eskom has 15 of these power stations. All right, so you can do the numbers and just try to fathom how massive that is. All right, so starting a boiler and one of these turbines costs you about 1.5 million rand, just starting it up. It's like, starting up your car. Imagine that would cost you 1.5 million rand. So they are always running, and their speed, the low speed at which they can run is about 50%. So imagine you have a car, your max speed is 100 kilometers an hour, but your lowest speed is 50. Like anything below that, your car stalls and you have to shut it down. So ideally, you can only operate these machines between 50 and 100%. And the electricity is never dumped. Like, that's a misconception. Electricity cannot be dumped. Your supply and your demand must always match each other. So the amount of electricity you generate and the amount of electricity that we all use in our houses and in our offices and on the mines, they must always match each other 100%. Now, what if the supply is too low? So Eskom cannot supply enough to meet the demand. Well, then something happens that we're very familiar with. It's load shedding, right? But what if the demand cannot match the supply? Well, then the generators are throttled. But like I mentioned, they can only be throttled between up to 50%, right? And not anything lower than that. But that's not a problem because Eskom controls all of the supply, all of the coal power stations. But here's the issue now. IPPs, independent power producers, coming online, connecting to the national grid. Eskom has no control over it. In fact, Eskom is engaged in long-term supply contracts with those IPPs. So they have to take the power, regardless. And they have to make a plan with the coal-fired power generators if there's too much power, right? And this is, the sun and the wind, they don't always shine, they don't always blow. So it's actually a huge, huge problem for Eskom. Eskom also has something that's called the reserve margin, which is about 2,000 megawatts, which I always have, even during load shedding. Why? Because if one of these large turbines trip and they go off suddenly, that's 600 megawatts off the grid, and they have to very, very urgently make that up. Like I said, it must always be balanced. Now, they obviously cannot load shed within seconds, and they need to react within seconds. So that's not an option, really, if something like that happens. So they go into the reserve margin, and if the reserve margin cannot actually be maintained, then they will trip a mine or a steel plant or something like that. One of these large, intensive electricity users in order to match supply and demand again. And Eskom has contracts with these guys in which they would then pay for the loss in manufacturing or production when these things happen. All right, that's it for the boring part. Let me move on. So now, imagine you could take the Bitcoin network and you can put it on this demand side, right? And it becomes a client that just feeds, that just takes electricity. So ignore everything about the Bitcoin network and cryptography and all of the theory behind that and the security and the keys. Just think of the Bitcoin network as a client. It's a black box. It charges electricity as much as you want to give it. And on the other side, you get about 2 rand a kilowatt hour. All right? The wonderful thing is that this Bitcoin network pays you in real time. So it uses the electricity in the morning, and you have the money in your bank account tonight. Much better than a municipality, right? A municipality which has a credit agreement, and Eskom sitting with about 92 billion rands of debt from municipalities. It's an easy customer. It takes the power when you have it. It doesn't take it when you don't have it. There's no contracts. And then the big thing is it stabilizes the grid. And what I mean by that is you can throttle it instantaneously in very, very, very small steps, very small margins. You can go up or down this Bitcoin mining farm. So it acts like an anchor. Now we do have, like I mentioned, some customers of Eskom that plays this role of being able to be tripped or throttled, and that is a steel plant, for example. But the thing about a steel plant is Eskom shuts them down, and it takes 3 days for them to start up. And Eskom needs to cover that production losses for 3 days, all right? Or a data center, but a data center you don't really want to shut down. Data center can also play the same role to a certain extent, but there's no granularity. You cannot really like throttle them in small little steps. You have to shut it down entirely, and it doesn't like it. Like a data center, really, you can imagine training an AI model doesn't want to be shut down. Whereas a Bitcoin miner, it doesn't care. It can be shut down, it can be throttled, it can be overclocked, it can be underclocked. You can shut down one machine, or you can shut down a section of them. It's not location dependent. You need a small little satellite for a warehouse as big as this one here, full of mining machines. It is just the absolutely perfect customer of a national electricity utility. All right, so in 2018, I wrote a blog article making a case for why Eskom should mine Bitcoin. It's still online. You can go and read it. That was 7 years ago. Now, I ran a little bit of a simulation for the last 5 years. So since 2020, because that's how far I could get the data. I couldn't get the data from 2018. So I ran a little bit of a simulation to see where Eskom and South Africa would have been if we mined Bitcoin for the last 5 years. So I think this will, the numbers are quite amazing. It's fascinating. All right, so starting in April 2020, mining up until the end of last year with S19 Pros, and a power plant size of 2,000 megawatts. Now, how did I get to 2,000 megawatts? Well, I took all of the data that I can find from Eskom for the last 5 years, hourly data, so very, very high frequency, and looked at how much surplus power they had in the last 5 years. Coal-fired power, not talking expensive power like gas turbines, hydro, those kind of things. Imports, we import power from Mozambique as well. Only the coal-fired power stations, which is very, very, very cheap power, by the way. It's almost free. So then, 2,000 megawatts from that, not mining during load shedding, of course, and not mining when the gas turbines are running. If we did that, then we would have mined for about 75% of the time for the last 5 years. Okay? And I ran the numbers, and it basically, it would have cost Eskom $1.7 billion to build the plant in 2020. They would have paid that money back in 279 days, so beginning January 2021, with a miner availability, as I said, about 72%. They would have mined 406,000 Bitcoin to date, all right? Now, if they were to sell that in real time, because remember in 2020, I think the price was $6,000 to $10,000, those ranges. So if they were to sell that in real time, they would have netted $12.1 billion. Now, if Eskom decided to only sell 50% of it, now you can do a lot of these like simulations, but if Eskom were to sell 50% of it and hodl the rest, they would have basically netted around $6 billion in the last 5 years, and they would have had about 400 billion rand in capital right now, which is equal to Eskom's total debt currently. So they would have been debt-free. And there's a lot of things that you can do with these numbers and this model, and you can play around. It can last year, or if they speculated slightly and they didn't sell on the spot, they sold maybe, or they did the arbitrage, or whatever the case may be, then of course it would have been a lot more. And I'm not an economist, but I'm sure there are many of you here that are economists that can also determine on what growth path South Africa would have been if Eskom was in a sound financial position with zero debt, with an additional 6 billion generated over the last 5 years. And I'm sure, well, I can just estimate that South Africa would have been on a double-digit growth path, 10% plus at this point. So yeah, I mean, the best time to have started mining was obviously in 2020, but I think the second best time is now.
Can you bring my presentation back up again, please? So now you know why I took him into Eskom. No, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And this stuff is being told to Eskom, by the way. Eskom knows us, so Dan, the CEO, Mteto, the chairperson, and he's been in front of them, and we're pitching really, really hard. I remember when I spoke to Herman, I was hoping to announce something here at this conference, but I mean, those wheels literally turned very, very slowly over there. So we're lobbying extremely hard to get them to mine Bitcoin. And what he hasn't spoken about are all the numbers with the equipment dialed down and brought back up again relative to that frequency moderation. He leaves out the maintenance costs. He also leaves out the impact renewables could have had on us as a nation, right? The grid, etc. If you add Bitcoin mines to everything, because all the actuarial science for green energy and renewable energy works when you add a Bitcoin mine into it. Without a Bitcoin mine, it becomes real tough when you are wind, solar, and all the other guys. If you add a Bitcoin mine in there, the numbers just make complete sense. Okay, so we just know that we're working very, very hard. So back to that top one over there. So Eskom, Bitcoin mining, we're working very, very hard on that. I want to go to the next one. Okay, so the barriers to orange pilling. Here are the 4 barriers that I could come up with. Number 1 is Bitcoin knowledge. People still don't understand what the asset is. And you know that Michael Saylor meme where he breathes deeply, like that? That's how we feel a lot. But you almost have to always go back to first principles with everyone. Talk about the problem before you talk about Bitcoin. Right? People, you can't talk about Bitcoin just out the gate. You first have to talk about the problem, and then you kind of get to how we resolve the problem utilizing Bitcoin. Shitcoins are causing a lot of hassles for us. Okay, just know that. They slow down the momentum completely, especially from a political perspective. Politicians don't want to bet on one thing, right? They want to be the neutral entity. That's why you can see the SPR in the United States now. It's a very crypto-orientated thing, and there's a worry that it may be a hybrid of all those coins plus Bitcoin that makes it up, and that's obviously not what we want. Legislation gets in our way all the time. We need to change legislation. Legislative architectures and frameworks change slowly. Tools. Big thing that we don't understand in the Bitcoin community is, even though people want to do it, even though rules and things may change, the technology architectures may not be there to actually enable that. So example, we want the IFWG to approve Bitcoin like everywhere, or crypto everywhere. But the problem is they don't even have tools at South African Reserve Bank to monitor from SARS all the way through to financial intelligence through to the PA. We want banks to become custodians of Bitcoin and crypto, right? It would be amazing. We just heard that legislation framework changing in the United States. Problem here in South Africa, it's not just that the act needs to change. We need to have tools at SARB to monitor banks so we don't have little FTXs happening all over the place with every single bank, right? We need the tools. To put those tools in is absolutely pivotal. And that's the other thing that Carel and I are involved in together. We mentioned Silver Sixpence. That's a technology stack that enables legislators to have the tools to monitor, to report, to keep accountable, etc. We need those tools. The tools aren't there yet. I want to show you some things this is very, very confidential, and I took it from an email thread, and I took the part of the email out that I thought I could share here today. This is when we pitched to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We went at board level, we went everywhere. Okay, and we have an entity that is listed on the stock exchange. You can do the kind of dots connecting behind me thing if you want. But we want to launch a class of share that is traded on the JSE that is backed by a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Okay, so here was the response back from them. So this was our lawyers. They said, we've had initial feedback from the JSE. Read the listing of the DPREFs. That's the class of share. This would be viewed as a derivative instrument. And the reference is crypto assets, the response. So here's the big challenge. Take a look at this. I've attached the IFWG paper referred to above, recommendation 23. Here's our issue right now. Why we don't have a MicroStrategy in South Africa at the moment. It's 8.4.3.2. It says recommendation, the issuing of a derivative instrument or other security that references crypto asset as the underlying asset should not be permitted until further notice. So that's been there since they wrote the paper's first version. So we're fighting that at the moment, and the way we're going to fight it is there's various ways we're going to attack it, but we're lobbying them. I mean, it's so obvious why the JSE should open up to this, right? I mean, we need people to be active and trading and owning assets, etc. I think there's no better thing than us listing a share on the JSE. Now, it's not just individuals, the retail investors. Institutional investors want exposure to Bitcoin. If we can get this going, we believe pension funds would flow in. We believe large organizations that want exposure to this asset class will cascade in. The reason MicroStrategy is so successful and it's such high demand is why. It's because the institutions can't get to Bitcoin. They don't have legislative frameworks. They don't understand the risk, or they don't have the tools. So what do? The best way to get to Bitcoin, only other way, is to go buy MicroStrategy. If you're in the UK, you're buying MicroStrategy to get exposure to Bitcoin, right? It makes more sense. Also, if you want some more levered instruments, you want to play around a little bit, you want to have options trading associated with the instrument, this is the way you do it. So we think this is amazing for the JSE. We think this is amazing for South Africa. We're working very, very hard on this. Okay, hopefully we can announce something this year. This is one of those things I was hoping to announce at the conference, but we're working very hard on this. This is an open letter. This was sent by Rob. I'm sharing this here. I think it's important to share it here. This is an open letter sent to pretty much every single political party head within the GNU government, right? So open letter to the South African government adopting Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. That was dated January the 1st, 2025. We wrote this letter, Rob and myself, and we've sent it to every single one of them. We actually signed it. So we talked about economic diversification, inflation ahead. We talked about independence, the BRICS context. We spoke about driving financial innovation, economic growth. Bitcoin mining as a strategic initiative, and this is all of Carel's stuff, lands up in there. Number 5, financial and debt management benefits, strengthening fiscal resilience. Number 6 was strategic implementation and BRICS collaboration. And then number 7 was obviously seizing the opportunity and what this could mean for us. So this letter went, and this is, I think, one of the reasons Helen's here today. Jimmy Manyi, that's one of the reasons he's here today. I've spoken to, let me not drop more names, but there's a lot of political leaders that are meeting with us off the record to ask the dumb questions and to frame their party's positioning relative to Bitcoin. So it is happening. Okay, so just kind of hang in there. The noise that you're making at this level, just know at the political level and the large institutional level, there's leanings happening in. There's big investments. We've made a big commitment. The commitment that we've made relative to Carel's presentation is a 15 billion rand commitment. That we have commitment around 15 billion rand investment for Bitcoin mining infrastructure if we can get the nod. So we don't expect Eskom to buy anything. We don't expect anyone to put 15 billion rands worth of Bitcoin infrastructure down right away. The socioeconomic impact of an investment like that is significant, right? And the only reason it's not happening is people don't understand, they don't know how, and we need to educate them. And this is what this is all about. Okay, this is just go back one slide if you can. This is the one that replied back quickest. This is very, very impressive. When we sent this to the DA, Alan Wynne came right away. He said, I've engaged our treasury on your mail, and we'll certainly chat to the national team in early January when we meet. Thanks, Alan. We can even announce a Western Cape Bitcoin reserve. Okay, so these I don't know what Helen will say here today. Maybe she'll allude to some of this stuff, but even on a provincial level, discussions are being had around strategic Bitcoin reserves and utilizing Bitcoin as a hedge. Okay, so that's what's happening. I was going to go through some more stuff, but I think that's it for now. The message to you is we're leaning in deeply. It's real. Don't get despondent. Stay away from the crypto rubbish, and keep telling people we're not crypto, keep telling people we're Bitcoin, and yeah, let's keep orange pilling. Thanks so much for the time. Thanks for having me here. Okay.